Hi, everyone. My name is Lou Camry, and this is Ben Pruzan, and we're the leaders of Brown's Entrepreneurship Program, the undergraduate entrepreneurship initiative at the school. Through tailored programming, resources such as speaker events, workshops, fellowships, and mentoring, we help students create change on College Hill. We are lucky to have one of the great supporters of entrepreneurship on campus here to moderate the panel today. We'd like to welcome Brown University Provost Vicki Colvin. Dr. Vicki Colvin is Provost and Professor of Chemistry and Professor of Engineering at Brown University. Prior to her appointment at Brown, Dr. Colvin was Vice Provost for Research at Rice University and Director of Rice's Center for Biological and Environmental Nanotechnology. Vicki's research explores how nanoscale particles interact with the environment and living systems.
As Provost, Vicki is the Chief Academic Officer and is responsible for all of the academic and budgetary functions within the college, the grad school, School of Engineering, School of Medicine, and School of Public Health. In addition to her academic work that Luke mentioned and her leadership on campus, Vicki is also one of the key supporters of the launch of the Summer Breakthrough Lab, or the B-Lab, which is a summer-long incubator for Brown undergrad and grad student ventures. This semester, in typical Brown fashion, Luke and I created a GISP, or a Group Independent Study Project, with Vicki as our professor, and we helped develop the curriculum and the implementation and the plan for this summer's incubator. So from classes in her office to lovely Southern barbecue in her house with our entire club, we've had a fantastic, fantastic semester with Provost Vicki Colvin, and we'd love you all to please join us in welcoming her and an amazing panel of alumni speakers for today.
Always great.
All right, well, thanks for joining us this morning for the full 3-day graduation celebration. It's my first graduation here at Brown, so I'm enjoying it. So what we're going to do today is we're going to hear about entrepreneurship from Brown's own. And I think that when I got to the campus last summer and I began to understand its culture, one of the things that became clear is it's sort of a campus that is going to attract people who are entrepreneurs, because you get to decide and design your own major. What that also means is that the students who select Brown really are able to take risk in a way I think other schools make more difficult, because it's hard to compare students at Brown. They each have their own path and their own direction. And that leads to a sort of environment where they can take that class that maybe they shouldn't or doesn't fit into their concentration. And so I think this sort of ability to think outside of the box, be original, to take risks, all of those characteristics are really the characteristics of great entrepreneurs. And so when I got to campus, I was really interested in all of the sort of grassroots effort, like the Student Entrepreneurship Program, and what we could do as a university to begin to capitalize and draw that together, better support it and better project it into the world. Because in fact, I think as you're going to hear from this panel, there is a pretty strong network of Brown entrepreneurs out there. And it's really important to make sure that we allow that to happen even better and more for the students of the future. So we'll be starting with the Summer Breakthrough Lab, and there are other pilot programs wrapped up in what is going to, we hope, become a center for innovators and entrepreneurs, both students, grad and undergrad, and also reaching into the faculty. And we have a nice partnership with RISD already in that arena, so it's very interesting. So one of the things about the speakers today that I think is also characteristic of Brown is that when you think of entrepreneurship and you go to some of our peer institutions, you typically find it's all tech. Or it's kind of conventional entrepreneurship. And when you start looking at the portfolio of Brown entrepreneurs, you find everything from tech entrepreneurship into social entrepreneurship and even cultural entrepreneurship. So I think there's a diverse array of interests and areas that our students and alums operate in, and I think this panel is going to really illustrate that. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to briefly introduce the panel, going from your right to your left, and then I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and answer a provocative question to get us kicked off. So first, over here, is Kirsten Toby. She is founder and chief impact officer of Revolution Foods. Then next, we have Andrew, I believe, right? Andrew Shapiro is founder and partner of the Broadscale Group. Then we have, sorry, it's not in order here, Adam Seifer, co-founder and co-CEO of Everplans.com. And finally, Adam Vitarello, co-founder and president of Optoro. So my provocative question to them, and you guys each take a couple of minutes, is what is your most favorite failure? And how did that lead to the start of your business or not? So we'll start with Kirsten.
That's a good question. I think, I mean, many entrepreneurial ventures start because of failures or experience a lot of failures along the way. We're no exception to that. I think that when I think about sort of the trajectory that led me to Revolution Foods, and the biggest failure was I think I didn't recognize the power of sort of consumers in making change. I think when I was here as an undergrad, I thought a lot about, like, I was really interested in the food system, and so I thought maybe I should be a geologist, or maybe I should be an environmental scientist to sort of make create the products and the science to be able to, make better food and that sort of thing. And I think the failure in my mind was just my own failure to recognize that if you're really going to change sort of a system like food, you have to start with changing the minds and the behaviors of the people that are the sort of end users of that food, and the people that are consuming that food. So I'll give that as my intro.
Okay, great, thanks. Andrew?
Hi, I'm Andrew Shapiro. I started my first company, Green Order, sort of at the height of the dot-com boom in 2000. And we had to basically live through the dot-com crash. And so our failure was we had a business model that was perfect for, I would say February of 2000, and then March of 2000, the initial shocks came in the dot-com crash. We were doing a B2B marketplace, remember those? An e-commerce play to help big companies go green by finding greener energy, greener products, greener solutions for their businesses through an online B2B marketplace. And within basically months of I guess we were 9 months old as a startup, nobody wanted to fund those kinds of companies anymore. So we had to pivot, and I would say my sort of biggest learning as an entrepreneur is the power of the pivot, learning how to assess when the market has changed and when you need to reinvent the young business that you're creating, and that was the first time that happened for me.
All right, thanks. Adam?
So I don't think I have a specific catastrophic failure for you to enjoy, but I'll talk about a type of failure that happens a lot and that I've experienced. I've started a number of companies, and some of them have gone on to become real things, but a bunch of them never got anywhere. And I think the ones that didn't get anywhere generally suffered from the same thing, and it's something that I see with particularly young entrepreneurs all the time, which is doing a PowerPoint and having meetings and talking about your idea begins to feel like forward progress. And it isn't. You'll meet with 10 people in a week and feel like, oh wow, we had a great week. This is really going great, and you didn't actually do anything. And so the idea becomes the thing, and you forget about actually building the product or the service and launching the business. And so one failure that I've experienced many times myself, and I would recommend keep your eyes open, try to avoid this. Go do things. Create a prototype, get something out there, get your first client, even if you have to pay them to be your client, and start doing your business and get your thing out there so that you don't experience the failure over and over again of getting really excited about a PowerPoint.
Yeah, so we were talking earlier. I think one of the funny things I think with Brown and entrepreneurship is there's almost no failure in either. I was just racking my brain of failures, and it sounds cheesy, but like all the failures, the things that I think folks would think of as failures, are actually were just like great learning opportunities for us. And so we had a business, kind of a tangential business that we started right after Brown. And I would not recommend starting a company right after Brown. Maybe a couple years of learning from mistakes of others. But we pivoted along the way, as most businesses do. But those were like, where the opportunity wasn't there, we learned and we just changed, right? And so it was like a great learning opportunity. That's probably where we matured as much as possible as a company. I mean, our first business model that my business partner actually pitched at the Brown Entrepreneur panel in 2004 didn't win, but I think we're probably the only company still going. We're not doing that idea anymore. We learned from it and said, this thing's just totally unscalable. We're going to have to hire 1 million employees to get to, to make the impact we want. And so we switched. Is it a failure? I don't think it was a failure. It was just a great opportunity to be like, this isn't working, and change. And I think that actually, like, back to Brown, was the biggest thing I learned from that, was just like quickly realizing, hey, this isn't working, and moving on to something else.
Great. So I think it's this sort of theme of change and pivot, and how you start off in one direction and you have to go to another. So one additional question along those lines, if you think about where you are today, what do you think that, how did Brown perhaps shape or move you towards an entrepreneurship direction? Was there something about the educational experience here that you think set you up, or do you think you had it in your DNA before you even got here?
Well, for me, I think what Brown did for me was teach me and enable me to really follow my passion. And so I think more than being just like a serial entrepreneur, I would consider myself a social entrepreneur, which means that I'm working on an issue that I care a lot about, and that issue is providing access to high quality, healthy food for kids across America. And I think what I learned and felt at Brown was that it was a place that you could really pursue your passion, and you could learn anything you wanted to learn about an area that you were interested in. And so I think, and this is also a big pivot that I made. I spent probably my entire time at Brown and 4 or 5 years after Brown thinking the only way that I could make an impact in the area that I was interested in would be either in going into a nonprofit, or going into education, or starting a nonprofit. Like I just thought impacting a social issue in the way that I wanted to, you would have to be in the sort of nonprofit sector. And so it took me some time through and then after Brown to realize that you could actually really significantly, and probably more significantly, impact a social issue through a for-profit entrepreneurial model. But I think Brown enabled me to realize that I could pursue a career that was based around my personal passion and an area that I cared a lot about from a really personal and emotional perspective.
I'll pick up on that because I would say my path was similar. When I was at Brown, I did not say to myself, I want to be an entrepreneur. I don't think I had the least interest in business. Didn't take a single business-oriented class. If there were any, I don't think there really were many.
Engine 9.
Yeah, and I didn't take Engine 9. I remember that there was that one class. But I was, Brown, Brown was, just on a personal level, incredibly eye-opening to me. And totally changed my life in terms of making me think that I wanted to do something socially useful in the world. And I did not think coming out of Brown that the way to do that was becoming a startup entrepreneur. I went to law school. I did progressive legal stuff and journalism and tried to influence the world in more typical ways that Kirsten was saying, advocacy, nonprofit type stuff, think tank type stuff. And then it just happened that in the late 90s, I was in a circle of friends who all went to Brown and grew up basically in the same culture of kind of risk-taking and follow your own passion. And we were laughing about it earlier, if they still have SNC. That's a culture that lends itself to being an entrepreneur because you can fail and it doesn't go on your record. And that led me to start my first company, just basically realizing that there was another way to try to impact the world. I should say, I don't know if Adam, you would remember, in the late 90s, the idea of mission-driven business was completely, charted territory. I remember because I went to a conference, there were so few people there. I actually got to meet Ben and Jerry, like of Ben and Jerry's. And I went up to them and I was like, so I'm thinking of starting this green business to help businesses, you know, become more environmentally sound and innovative. What do you think? And Ben Cohen was like, yeah, socially responsible business. It's a good idea. You got to just remember one thing. To have a successfully socially responsible organization, you actually have to be in business. And I was like, oh, I have to be in business? Like I have to learn about that side of things? But I think there were so many things in the culture of Brown, the, you know, creative, unusual nature of it, that to me it just felt organic. And then we were just saying, for me at least, my circle, I think 2/3 of my friends from Brown started companies. And then went on to have entrepreneurial careers. And that's the other thing I would just say to everybody here is that you don't have to start a company to be an entrepreneur. You can be an entrepreneur who does start a nonprofit, or who does start a school, or who does start whatever. I mean, today, the possibilities are absolutely endless and impacting things through different kinds of enterprises, right? And there are, you know, B Corps and just a whole hybrid way of things. But I agree with Kirsten that I've come to believe that working within our, you know, free market capitalist system actually is probably the best way to drive change.
All right, thanks.
Ditto. You know, I think being an entrepreneur is really hard because when you start something, there's no infrastructure, there's nobody there to figure stuff out for you. You probably don't have experts in most of the things and most of the issues and problems that you're trying to solve. And so you have to be this hyper adaptable polymath to get through it. You have to learn how to get good at everything. And, you know, and it doesn't matter if you're starting a software company or a corner grocery. It's the same type of issue. And I think Brown really does a good job of turning out hyper adaptable polymaths. I think the curriculum really encourages you, as Kirsten said, to be brave and try stuff. And, you know, I was a fine arts major here, painting and drawing, and I took classes, I think, in 20 different departments because the curriculum allowed for that. And so I took fourth dimensional math, and I took Scandinavian literature, and I took neuroscience, and, you know, I took computer programming, I took planetary geology, the best classes with the best professors. And I think that you learn to solve a different kind of problem in each one of those areas. And I think that really helps you to become the type of person who can take on lots of challenges when you're starting a venture.
Yeah, those were excellent points. Almost exactly what I was thinking coming in. You know, we actually just had the pleasure of having, I don't know if anyone knows this guy John Maeda, who was president of RISD for a long time. We had the pleasure, we have one of our investors is Kleiner Perkins, and he's on their board, and he came and talked to our company. And he said one of the things he was trying to promote at RISD, which also around Brown, is like the idea, and my same experience. I didn't take a business class. I took probably another 20 different departments, and they try to promote this idea of the slash, you know, the designer / social entrepreneur / you know, community organizer. Those are the people that go on to really succeed. That he's found, you know, and he was actually also the president of MIT Media Lab for 12 years, and all the folks that came through, they were just amazing and really changed the world, where they didn't like study business, hone business, and then do it. They really were just, you know, again, that kind of polymath that did, and was just really intrigued by learning how to solve problems. I mean, that's what I think I came away from Brown was, one, there's no guardrails on what you can do in life. You know, a lot of folks I know that also went to great schools, they're like, you know, I'm in the finance track from day one, and I'm going to do that, or I'm in the health track from day one. There's no guardrails, and then that's eye-opening, right? It's probably a little bit scary, and then it's eye-opening, and you can do whatever you want. And so again, I didn't really ever think of the concept of business or entrepreneurship I just like the idea of like solving really interesting problems. And then similar to you all, just kind of went in and said, okay, well, I guess this is going to take the form of a business, right? And there was obviously a lot of learning pains around like what that meant, and incorporating and hiring and all the do's and don'ts of doing business. But it really is a great opportunity just to solve big problems, and you learn about all these awesome people that are solving huge problems, whether it's part of a nonprofit or and again, I'm just thinking of my friends from Brown, or starting their own business. And Brown really encouraged that, hey, just, nothing, there's no track for you, figure your own out, and go out there and solve something big.
Great. I think we can sort of hear the sort of theme of the open curriculum and how that really was an important element. So this is a quicker question before I shift gears, because I think it builds off what you all just said. So none of you took a business class that then helped you become an entrepreneur. I don't think so, right? Okay. So one of the questions I then have is, can you teach anything useful about entrepreneurship? Anything at all? Or is it best just to go do it? You can start from the other end. So why don't you go first?
Uh-oh, that gave me the hard question.
You were here most recently. Yeah.
I was actually just thinking that when I was trying to prep when I was walking up here. What can you do to foment entrepreneurship? I don't know. I mean, I think it's the atmosphere, and I think it's the environment. Again, being able to take risks and go out on a limb a little bit. I think there's definitely some practical things that I would have loved to have known, about businesses and, again, hiring and how to. I mean, the biggest thing for me from running a business. So now, we started. It was 3 of us, and now it's 220. Motivating and hiring, retaining, motivating people that ultimately do everything. I'm only one person, and I'm a figurehead. I mean, our business, which we have, by the way, a lot of Brown alums, which is awesome. You have to be able to motivate them and give them a great, inspiring message about why they should be passionate about coming to work every day. That was stuff that we learned on the fly. I don't think I got a great necessarily background in that from Brown. I think that could be helpful in terms of just, hey, this is a world where you're a community, motivating others, and so encouraging. And I'm sure the resources are out there at Brown, but that's something where just talking about the power of the community and the power of the group and how to motivate and manage and continue to strive for a better future there. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I would say one thing, which is Adam just made me think about it. At our height, when we were kind of growing fast and hiring, and we had it was a time when a lot of people were interested in green business. It was kind of 05, 06. So we had I always leaned towards Brown grads, and the reason I leaned toward hiring Brown grads because I knew that they would be independent thinkers.
Right.
So I don't think you can teach entrepreneurship, because as we're saying, it's this construct that has a lot of different things in it, but you can give people a framework to be independent-minded and answer that mission question that Kirsten was asking, what am I really passionate about doing, which leads them to figure out what are the big problems that need solving and how do we solve them, which to me is ultimately a definition of being an entrepreneur, right? So I would usually, and it's funny, I had folks who said, don't we need to have folks who have had scientific, like concentrations or majors, right? They majored in environmental science. And I would say I would have failed my own qualification for hiring, so no. I'm okay with someone who, did semiotics, if they're passionate about this or whatever. So.
I would just add one thing, I think, that's great, excellent points. And almost to the point earlier that Kristen made was, encouraging people to realize that you can actually solve big problems through private entrepreneurship. I probably come from one of the most lefty, families. I'm certainly on the left side of the spectrum. But just to encourage people, like, hey, you can actually do amazing things through private enterprise. I think one thing at Brown, you do think, oh, I have to join a nonprofit, I have to join Greenpeace, which are all fantastic pursuits. You can have a huge impact in the private sector and do good for the world. I think that message, continuing to reiterate that is an important one.
Another thing I think Brown did a really good job of for me and a bunch of friends who, we were just talking about this yesterday, that at Brown, even outside of the curriculum, there are so many opportunities for leadership. Like I mean, when I look at, the group of women that I'm here with, each one of us was a leader of a club or a program at the Swear Center or a sports team, or being a captain of, and the skills that you learn, even if you're not explicitly learning them, but they're skills of leadership. I mean, it's motivating teams, it's organizing, it's having clear goals and holding people accountable, and like all these things that, we didn't really call it leadership, I don't think, when we were here, but when I look at the actual activities and the skills that I use every day in my work, it's much more things that I learned in those kinds of, clubs and environments where, organizing an outdoor leadership program through the Swear Center for high school kids in downtown Providence. And like the things that I learned in that environment were so relevant to the work that I do every day now. And I don't think anybody ever sort of said like, oh, these skills that you're learning are leadership skills, but I think the fact that Brown has so many different opportunities for student leadership creates a group of alumni that are strong leaders, each in their own way. And even if they're not all the class president or whatever, they're leaders in very interesting and unique ways.
Good point.
I think probably 5 times a week, I find myself wishing, I wish that there had been a class in this, or I wish somebody had taught me this. But I'm also certain that if there had been a class in it, I wouldn't have taken it. And so
It's like Engine 9.
Like, I wish there had been a class on how to not hire crazy people, which is one of the toughest challenges in growing a business. But I'm sure I wouldn't have taken the class. So it's a tough thing to answer.
Right. Okay. So I'd like to, we haven't really talked about your companies, and so the question that I'm going to throw out there and to have you tell us a little bit about what you do is, over the last 12 months, what thing are you the most proud of doing, or for your company, or having your company do? We can start, I guess, with Andrew.
Oh, I'm thinking still.
You're thinking. Anybody else got an answer?
Wow.
Said provocative, so.
Boy, there's so many things that you can.
I know.
You can be proud of. We have victories. We have small victories every day. We launched a project last week that was 4 months over schedule and took time from just about everybody in the company. And man, it was so frustrating to be working on that project, but to have it be done, really proud of that. But I mean, I think from a broader business perspective and a social impact perspective, my company helps people get all of their plans and information together in one place and shared securely with the important people in their life, so that if something happens to them, their family is not going through that horrible scenario that most families end up going through, where they're trying to figure out financial plans and estate plans and online accounts and household vendors and funeral wishes and health directives. That's what Everplans does, and we've worked on that for a really long time. And interestingly, it's kind of a nice thing. It took a really long time before any of our customers died. And so, and got to use the product to its fullest extent. I mean, people use Everplans in different ways while they're still alive. I used it the other day when I was trying to figure out how to choose a new health plan. I needed to tell my wife's doctors, and she was asleep, and I didn't want to wake her up. I went into her Everplan, and there it was. But recently, we've had a couple of our customers have deaths in their family, and the people in their family reached out to us to let us know how much easier it made things for them to have that available to them. And I think, I think for any entrepreneur, when you finally get that validation of your thing being used in the way you hoped it would be used by one of your customers, that's the ultimate pride.
Okay. Another one have something they're proud of?
I think for us, I mean, we've been in business for almost 10 years, and we're, our core business is making fresh, healthy meals and delivering them to schools every day. And we started it with the idea that it's not just important for kids to have access to healthy food in their school cafeteria, but we believe that that's one of the very critical things to setting kids up for success academically. But there's pretty limited research that actually links what kids eat and academic success, because there's, as you can imagine, designing research to sort out all the things that impact that. Is really difficult. But one of the things that's happened in the last 12 months is we've actually started to have, and it's anecdotal for sure, but we've started to have superintendents talking about the importance of food in their schools as a lever for setting their kids up for success and for ensuring that kids have what they need to be successful, at least in terms of what the school can provide. And so that to us has just brought the mission and the kind of business goals together in a really meaningful way to not just have ourselves talking about how important it is for kids to eat healthfully to be able to do well in school, but to actually have that it's the outside validation of a school leader standing up and saying, this is a priority for me as a school leader to make sure that my kids have great food that they can eat. Great.
Yeah, one thing that we're proud of, so at Optoro, we figure out a better way to deal with all the kind of forgotten goods, the returned in excess inventory of the retail world. About 30 to 40% of it gets thrown away, it gets shipped all around the country. It's a really super old-fashioned, guys with cowboy hats and liquidators. And so, one thing that was nice over the last 12 months is, we've always had a bit of a green angle to us just because of the nature of our business. We're reducing waste, we're increasing efficiency. We weren't really great at promoting it. When we went out to raise money, we thought, hey, we should promote this a little bit more to make us attractive to some of the green funds. And we actually have basically the two most preeminent green funds in the world, the Kleiner Perkins Green Growth Fund, and then the Generation Investment Management, which is Al Gore's fund out of London, invested in us. And we were able to prove with some of that money the real impact that our solution would have if it was basically used on scale. And that was something that made us really proud, because it was, it's basically the equivalent of taking, I think, 20 million cars off the road. And something like 10 million tons of waste reduced. So, and the fact that, we're here, our business, we have to be a sustainable business and make money, but to say that it actually is providing a real great social good, and that, when you buy something and return it and you think, the fairies out there go and solve it, and a lot of it was being thrown away, and we're helping to avoid that, was something that, we were really proud of.
First, I have to say, do you know Adam Werbach? Another Brown grad started a business right in this area. Got to hook you guys up.
Yeah, please do.
He started Yurtle.
Oh, yes. I do know that. I do know.
But that's actually what I like to do, is connect people. Yeah. And in fact, that's what I'm doing these days. So I started a new model of investment firm that is working in the clean energy and resource innovation area. And our thesis is, after being in this space for 10 years, I built a company and sold it, and thinking about what I want to do next, what I realized is that the biggest challenge to sustainable business is scale. And so many enterprises, we've been talking about entrepreneurship as if it's all roses. It's not. A lot of businesses in the clean technology space were launched over the last decade and failed. My diagnosis is the big reason is they weren't able to scale up, even if they had a technology that was proven, that worked, that was commercial. And it's funny, because we talk about innovation all the time without really unpacking what it means. And we think about innovation as big invention, big ideas, breakthrough ideas, but implemented at scale. And it's a little bit like the old thing about, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, does it really make a sound? And I think the same is true with entrepreneurship. We can have great entrepreneurs coming out of Brown or MIT or Stanford or wherever, but if they can't scale their ideas, we're not going to get to the impact that Kirsten's trying to get to. So what we do is connect big companies to small companies for strategic investment and strategic partnership that will take those innovative technologies and let them go global and mainstream. If some of you have been following what's happening, for example, in electric vehicles, look at a company like Tesla. Everybody ascribes that to the entrepreneurship of Elon and all that, which is true, but he also brilliantly brought in 3 huge companies as strategic partners, Toyota, Daimler, and Panasonic, one of which we're working closely with. And those partnerships enabled the success of Tesla, and it's not written about as much, but they're critical. So what am I proud of? I've got 6 big companies now that are working with us to invest in these businesses, and we've helped 2 or 3 companies over the last year to take an idea that was proven and was quote unquote working, but working at a tiny scale, and now they've got strategic partnerships that will help them over a course of some time, hopefully to get to the kind of scale we need to actually solve the types of problems that we were all inspired to go build those businesses behind, because unfortunately to date, too few of those businesses have gotten to that scale.
Great. So this is kind of, I didn't want to ask an advice question because it's so obvious, but I'm going to ask one, because all of you have probably been out there pitching your ideas, right, for investors or for others. So what advice, what is the one thing that people should do if they're pitching, and what is the one thing they shouldn't do?
Well, I know for us, one of the most important things, and I think it was one of the Adams that mentioned the importance of having a proven concept when you're pitching your idea. I was in business school when we were first raising funding, and we went out to our first couple of funding pitches with our PowerPoint deck and this great idea, and it just sort of fell flat because it was like, well, sure, anybody can put together a PowerPoint deck about an idea. So we created a prototype, which meant that we got a Whole Foods market to make food for us. We drove our car out there, picked up the food, brought it to a school in inner city Oakland, had the kids walk through the line, pick up their meal, sit down, eat it, give us feedback. We had to work with the principal, and it was a real live prototype. And so it was, bringing potential investors into that Oakland lunchroom where, we would say, okay, Mr. Investor, why don't you put on some gloves and sit here on the cafeteria line and serve kids this food that we've made. And that was what brought our investors on board, was seeing that there was a real need, being able to sit there and talk with a principal about where she saw the need and what the solution, how the solution we were providing was different from any other that she had seen, and then having the kids come up and say, that was good, can I have more? And we weren't staging any of this, it was real, but having a real live working kind of prototype made raising funding so much easier.
Great.
I think for us, and we have done some fundraising, the thing I tell folks on this is really to quote unquote dream big and paint a really powerfully large problem that you're going to solve. Do it with a proven solution, and really also just highlight the strength of the team. Right? It's like you don't know what really you're going to get into once you start. A lot of your ideas and how you think you're going to tackle the problems change, but the things that don't change are the people involved and the really high level problem you're trying to solve. Right? You might just like whiff a bunch of times in terms of how you're going to solve it. For us, it's been a few times. As soon as we started painting that large picture to our investors and said, look at this massive space. This is over $1 trillion worldwide. It's so antiquated. It's super inefficient. Someone's got to solve this. And by the way, there's not a lot of people waking up, or graduating college saying, I want to get into reverse logistics, which is the industry I'm in. And we're super passionate about it because we're super passionate about eliminating a lot of this waste. You paint the team that's basically not going to let failure get in the way, and you paint the big problem. We found that to really resonate.
Great.
But a key part of, I think, what you just said, Adam, that I would highlight for folks is even as you're pitching big and talking to the team, you also, I really respect when people come to talk to me about businesses they're trying to start, people who are honest about what they don't know. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really critically important. When you ask an entrepreneur, so how are you going to do this? We're going to just go, bulldoze it and do this and do that, You honestly, we've all been through it. You don't really know what you're going to do. And that's why Adam's right. The right answer is, you know what? Don't really know. Got a great group of compadres here. We're going to figure it out. And frankly, the most enticing pitch is, one of the reasons we're here to see you is we need your help. right? Most investors I know are passionate about doing what they're doing because they actually want to build businesses. They want to solve those same problems, and they want to be partners in doing that. So if you actually go in and say, I've got this dream of solving this problem, I think we know what the use case is, and we've got this amazing team, and we've built this prototype, but we can't get from here to there on our own, or we're going to need help, and that's why we're seeking your cash.
Right. And people love to see traction. So like we pitched a ton of, like almost every investor we've talked to, the first time we talked to them, they said, that's great, come back to us when you have more traction. And so people love a success story. Like they saw you when you were 5 and now you're 25 and now you're 100. So like if you paint the idea and you have the team, they're like, okay, that's great, but are you going to execute? If they've seen you execute, then it's like, okay, I get it. Like they're going to do this again.
Great. Okay, so I wanted to see if there were any audience questions. Yes.
I have a question about the nature of entrepreneurship itself. To some degree, listening to you, it sounds like being an entrepreneur is a smart group of people with a lot of personal authority in their organization who have more problems than solutions. If that's a fair enough or close enough description, then what happens when you succeed and you have rules, more successes than you have problems? You become eBay, you become Amazon, you cease being entrepreneurs at the top of those organizations and just become normal business people. And if you don't just become normal business people at the top of those organizations, why can't conventional CEOs be entrepreneurs inside of Chrysler or GM, Standard Corporation?
It's a great question. I mean,
Whoever would like to take it.
I've worked with a lot of big companies. Part of my entrepreneurial work has been helping big companies to innovate. Most of what I've done, and the problem you're identifying is one of the most important ones, basically, in business. Is that, and it's a paradox, right? I mean, even some of the new big companies, the Googles, the Facebooks, they're struggling with how to stay entrepreneurial. Imagine what it's like. I do a lot of work with General Electric. I've worked with them for over a decade. They're an entrepreneurial company when it comes to a big company, but boy, is it hard when you have 350,000 people to create a culture of entrepreneurship, and you're more than 100 years old. These big companies are all struggling with this, and in fact, the irony is most of them are realizing now, like take General Electric, they have a centralized R&D function with more than 3,000 PhDs and other senior level scientists. They're still realizing that they can pick up huge insights from working with startups. So one of the things we do together is try to put their businesses together with young startups to kind of port some of that entrepreneurial DNA into the big organization, the host organization, so to speak. That's part of the value of their strategic partnering with small companies, is to try to have that rub off a bit. But it's super challenging, and even companies like, as I mentioned, Google, actually Microsoft, if you've been reading and following what they're doing, their new CEO is completely trying to get them to be more like a startup, and is in fact working with one of my closest friends from Brown to try to create a more innovative culture inside Microsoft to go back to where they were 30 years ago.
I don't know, by the way, if that's, I think it's a good thing, by the way, right? That big companies become lumbering giants, and it's the opening for everyone. Yes. Someone showed an incredible stat to me that was like the average age of the companies in the top Fortune 500. I don't know if you've seen that stat, but it's literally went from like the average age was like 60 years, and now it's like 10, and they think it's going to be like 6 years in 10 years time. Meaning like literally their lifespan is going to be 6 years, and then they're going to be done.
Right.
And I think it's just the pace of innovation and the pace of creative destruction is amazing. I would say, solve a big problem, then you have a bunch of people fall out from the company. They solve big problems. I personally don't think there's really an issue with that.
Right.
And I don't know if you can be, honestly, for us, I always say, employees go, well, what's the end game? I go, well, as soon as it becomes a bureaucracy in a company and I have to start optimizing and not innovating, I'm out. Because it's not, there's people that like doing that. That's business. That's why we can take business classes. That's a totally different game, right? Optimizing, they cut costs, they figure out how to make better meetings. Like, that's great. It's not going to solve the world. But those companies crumple and people come out of them, and those people solve big problems. That's awesome.
You also run into a time frame issue as the companies get bigger and bigger. They have more resources and they can afford to take longer to fail or succeed. And so
Exactly.
I think that, you know, there's no easy answer to how big companies can do a better job with innovation, but I think if they do things to sort of artificially solve the time frame issue and create limits to how long projects can take to succeed or fail, that makes it feel more like a startup.
Nice. That's
Yes.
good.
I think there's another take on the question, which is, as small companies get bigger, how do you know, how do things change? And we certainly saw kind of an inflection point, you know, 6 or 7 years in, where, you know, we had all kinds of people who were just jacks of all trades, who everybody could do a little bit of everything, but nobody was really an expert in anything, and everybody was just entrepreneurs. You know, we were just this whole group of entrepreneurs making things happen. But then we got to a point where we were, you know, getting bigger and actually needed to start putting in place more systems and processes, but didn't want to become just like a giant bureaucracy. And so I think that was one of the biggest challenges that we've had, is then finding the right people to bring into the team who have, you know, sort of, you know, bigger company or you know, other experience. That they're not just coming because they believe in what we're doing, but they have something to bring to the table in terms of experience building systems or being in bigger environments, but who still can have the entrepreneurial mindset. And so we do a lot of work just in our interviewing process, making sure that when we're bringing new people onto our team in leadership roles, that they are going to be creative problem solvers, even if they're coming from a bigger company background. And we've, you know, of course, made mistakes in that way too. But the most
Are
successful.
those the same crazy people he was talking about?
Yeah, that's
Right.
the
Keep
class
hiring
that
the
we.
The
same
grown-ups
crazy
are not
people.
supposed to be the crazy people. Why are we talking about bringing the grown-ups?
But we have brought in people who, you know, we get sort of starry-eyed with their pedigree and their resume, and then they come in and they're like, well, where's my report on the this and this and this? You know, and we're like, you're supposed to create the system to make that report happen, because, you know, that's your job as a CFO. You know, you can't just come in and expect that everything is going to show up for you, because you've had that in other environments. So the right people to bring onto the team are the ones who, you know, both kind of know what the system should look like, but also have the kind of gumption to create it.
Right? Yes, we have a question over here.
Hi, I'm Peter Coates, class of 1980, getting older every day, it seems like. A year ago, I was at a graduation for my nephew at Stanford. So the culture in Stanford, Silicon Valley area is different than it is in New England, New York, Washington, and I'm from Michigan, so I get to see both sides. And the word that they use constantly out there, and it's kind of getting worn out, is disruptive. Everything has to be disruptive. And it's just boring after a while, because what they're really talking about is finding a word that makes them look revolutionary when they're really, many of them are doing little tiny little things, and they just want to get bought out in 5 years and get rich. Okay? So from where I stand in Michigan, it's neither Brown culture or Stanford culture. We went through the most wrenching, horrible, destructive period of the last 30 years, probably the last 10 years on top of the last 30 years. And just massive, complete breakdown of the economy. Michigan was the only state in the country to lose population between 2000 and 2010. So what I hear from Andrew is really interesting, and that is pairing startups, entrepreneurs, with big companies that need that energy and innovation. And I would like you to talk a little bit more about that. And just as an example, I live in Battle Creek, where Kellogg's and Post and Ralston make breakfast cereal. And they have gotten into this business of food safety now. Every time you turn around, there's 1 million chickens have to be killed, or 500 million pounds of something have to be thrown out, right? So how can places like Michigan partner entrepreneurs with big companies without having a Stanford or a Brown or MIT Media Lab parked in their backyard?
There was a really interesting article just in the last couple days in Fortune about companies like Kellogg and I don't know if Kellogg was mentioned in it, but big food companies. I mean, this is in the food industry, but how big food companies are learning from small food companies, and in many cases that's happening through acquisition, right? The big food companies are acquiring the small food companies, and Kellogg's was an interesting example because they acquired the Kashi company 15 years ago or so, let them operate independently out in San Diego in their headquarters, and then just 2 years ago, I think, they decided, okay, now we've sort of learned all this stuff from Kashi and learned how they function in a mission-driven way. So now let's move that business into Battle Creek. So they then moved the entire business into Battle Creek, and basically sales of Kashi just plummeted. So what they learned from that, the hard way, was, okay, we need to go back to establishing the Kashi, headquarters back in San Diego, where the culture and the DNA has always been. So I think we're seeing, big companies, and Ben & Jerry. There's so many examples in the food world of big companies acquiring small companies.
It's hard to think of one that's grown and not gotten bought.
Right.
Right. And Kirsten's point is a really. I talk to big companies about this all the time. The smart ones want to figure out how to not crush the entrepreneurial culture of a business that they buy or they incubate internally, and it's hard to do. I mean, the one thing I would say about Michigan and the experience, and I was an advisor to General Motors for 5 years and helped them launch their first electric, not the first, actually second, but the contemporary day, the Chevy Volt. There is interesting stuff happening that actually is a reflection of big corporates like Ford and General Motors in that industry, government trying to stimulate entrepreneurship and innovation and startups, and there are incubators with public money, federal and state, and then new clusters of entrepreneurship. I mean, it's not the case that companies only get born in Silicon Valley or in Boston or now, and it's a bit of a hackneyed thing by now, but you can start a company anywhere, and everything is so cheap to start, and everything is in the cloud, and you can really have virtual businesses, and so there's no reason that Michigan or any part of the U.S. or the globe can't be a center for this kind of innovation entrepreneurship. It is about creating the ecosystem. Right.
Yeah, and Michigan's got obviously some of the best schooling in the world, right? Yeah. Ann Arbor, and I would say my take is less about helping the big folks in Michigan and more about creating a culture where smaller companies can go. And they're happening, by the way. I mean, Detroit, because it's so cheap now and you're in a huge city and you have the amenities of a huge city, you're actually getting companies moving there. I mean, Shinola is obviously one they talk about a lot. But there's, you create this ecosystem where people can come about. I mean, in DC where we are, there's there's very few tech companies. And people say, how do you start something in DC? And it's like, there's smart people in DC. We bring them in and we hire them, we train them, and they're super excited, but they like to be a big fish in a small pond and not to be, see billboards for databases like you see in, Silicon Valley, where everything is disruption this, disruption that. So yeah, I think Detroit and anywhere. I mean, Kansas City is a huge one now. Austin. I mean, all over the country. Just put the right ecosystem in place, and they'll make a difference.
Okay, so I know we're at time, so unfortunately we'll have to close out the panel. We're right at noon and people are dribbling out. So I'm sure our panelists would be glad to answer a few more questions, but I think the theme has been really interesting today. Some of it was expected, how Brown's culture for undergraduates really translates into some of the choices they made in some unexpected ways. It was never a business class, that's what I'm taking away. And also the huge impact that your companies have and how driven the social change is underlying many of your ventures. And then I think this last point about the small and the big company interactions is a really growing area within this sort of entrepreneurship. It's a very new theme. So thank you so much. Please join me thanking our panelists.